First of all, welcome, Senator.
How are you?
Good to see you here. Welcome, everybody. It's a great opportunity for us to have a really intimate conversation together, and it's a really nice beginning, I think, to your political career. First crack in the Senate, and I think when we first met, you said you were initially a Victoria boy.
Yeah, don't tell anyone that. My constituents will be very upset. But I mean, we're all Australian. I think these state boundaries get very overblown.
So have you converted? Like, are you still an AFL, fan?
It's funny you should say that. I mean, I think if you were a politician and you were going to change your football team, you would probably lose a lot of credibility. So, I mean, I have, for better or worse, stuck with the Geelong Football Club.
Oh, that's not too bad. It's fairly neutral, it's not like Collingwood.
But there is a great story about this, that my senior New South Wales colleague is Senator Marise Payne, who's the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And she is also a out and proud Geelong supporter. So I guess it is quite a strange turn of events that two New South Wales senators would be Geelong supporters, but there you are. But I felt that because she was doing it, I could do it.
Fair enough. Now, I had a look at your speech, your first speech in Parliament.
Yep.
And you shared with everyone, in fact the nation, that Shepparton is a close link for your family when they first settled in Australia. And it turns out that Shepparton's also a bit of a close link for me.
Oh, really?
Because I spent a lot of my training time in Puckapunyal, which is very close to Shepparton, doing quite a lot down at the Combined Arms Training Centre.
Yeah, did you get to the pub in Shep much, or what?
A little bit.
That's good.
So, again, thanks for your time, and we'll get on to some of the more topical questions.
I should say about Shepparton, I mean, it's a good point to make that, I mean, there's no point running, I think that there's been a lot of politicians that are talking about technology and innovation and have frankly scared the pants off people in places like Shepparton. And so one of the things we wanted to do with this review is to really think carefully about the narrative. And I think that the key narrative point before we get into, capital and skills and tax is that technology is actually jobs accretive. It will actually create more jobs. And it's not just about, guys with funny propeller hats at Stone and Chalk here at Wynyard. It's also people working in agriculture in places like Shepparton that can avail themselves of technology. So I think that's a really important narrative point. So part of what we've tried to do with my travel around the state and around the country is to get a decent hold on ag tech. And so last week we went up to UNE, which is up at Armidale, and checked out the ag tech centre. So what we'll try and do in this report and in some of the outworkings is to profile some of those more, how do I say it, more suburban and regional impacts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So if it's all right with you, I'm going to ask you some broader questions and then
Probing,
obviously some
I hope.
specific stuff. Oh, yeah, I'm going to probe you.
Good.
I'm going to poke a few sticks.
I'm unprobable.
Let's see how unflappable you are.
Yeah.
All right. So in your speech, right, you said the following things.
Yeah.
We, so as in the Liberal Party, do not stand for any business or any vested interest. As Menzies himself said, we stand for the forgotten people, the great Australian middle class. They were, in his words, the salary earners, shopkeepers, skilled artisans, professional men and women. We support enterprise, we believe in markets, and we believe in some regulation of industry. We believe markets must serve the public interest, which is, I couldn't agree more.
Great speech.
So I'm not going to probe you on that one. But since I've come back 5 years ago from overseas, I've heard countless comments from whether it's politicians, people in the public sector, and especially regulators themselves, boasting that we've got a sophisticated regulatory system here in Australia that's the pride of the world, and that it is highly regarded by various regulators, especially in the Asian region, and that's why ASIC's got a lot of their bridges coming, and yet we've had some of the biggest retail banking scandals in the world. And so a lot of the frustrations of regtechs and fintechs are that we're seeing the incumbents attack the problem in the exact same way as they've attacked it previously, which is just to throw more bodies at it, as opposed to look to collaborate on a commercial basis with regtechs and fintechs to solve these problems with technology. What are the ways in which you think we can change that and incentivise these organisations to work differently?
Well, I think on the philosophy point, it's a very important point. I mean, I'm the first person who's ever been elected to federal parliament that used to work for the Business Council of Australia. So I have a good sense of what big business wants, and what we have tried to do under the leadership of Scott Morrison is to re-establish that connection that Menzies had with the forgotten people, and Howard had the battlers, and ScoMo talks about the quiet Australians. And what it's at its heart, it's about standing up for, you know, the workers and the middle class people of Australia. And I think we needed to do a lot of work, because there was a perception that we were just there for the cigar chompers. And, you know, we clearly lost the argument about the company tax cut publicly. I mean, that was a disastrous loss for the country, I think, because no one would seriously argue that we can run a capital-hungry economy like this with, you know, almost the highest headline corporate tax rate in the OECD. But the perception was, perception is reality. If we were getting our media training today from John Mangos, he would say perception is reality. And I think we've had to do a lot of work on reminding people that, you know, we're not there to represent any kind of industry or sector. Now, the Labor Party over the last 2 weeks, this is a topical example, have basically said, look, you know, we're not going to pass the Ensuring Integrity Bill, which is about reining in some of the excesses in employer associations and unions. Now, they're doing it because they're owned by the unions, right? And it's a classic case of vested interests winning the day. And so one of the tangible outworkings of our positioning under Scott Morrison is that fintech is a very, very good way for us to create more choice and frankly break down some of the oligopolies in the economy. Because we don't, I mean, I personally am not hostile to big business or small business, but there are huge advantages that large established businesses hold in this market, which we need to break down. And I think fintech is one of the ways we can do it. And sorry, this is a long answer, it's almost finished. Like the 4 Pillars policy and Qantas Sale and all these hilarious things that are designed, you know, in another age, I really would like to see the end of, because they're basically creating a particular advantage for an established business that frankly don't need those levels of protection anymore.
So I'm going to come back to that and expand on the question a little bit further.
Yep.
So if you look at a lot of the cases that were brought forward in the Royal Commission, and I think Westpac just recently is a classic example.
Yep.
A lot of those issues were raised or detected 1 to 2 years ago. So the vast majority weren't new. They were perhaps new to the public, but they weren't new to the regulators or the institutions themselves. And so if you look at the response time and the manpower that's required by the regulators today, whether it's ASIC or APRA or AUSTRAC, for example, they're taking literally 1 or 2 years to get to the bottom of a finding or an investigation.
Yep.
Which means not only is it taking 2 years to determine whether there's an issue or not, you've got 2 years worth of ongoing potential malpractice, so to speak, right, where you could have terrorists being financed for an additional 2 years. And so if we're talking about government as an exemplar, what do you think needs to be done by the regulators? Surely the regulators need to be adopting RegTech and FinTech themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
To lead the industry through.
So like, what I would strongly encourage people to do in their thoughts about this inquiry is to help us show how the solutions in this sector can help us improve the compliance outcomes in financial services. Now, what we don't want to do is to implement the Royal Commission and for that to re-entrench the market advantages we just discussed. We do not want to do that. Now, I think there's a risk that could happen because of the cost of compliance and the benefits which accrue to the large organisations that are already in existence. So to give you a sense of how important the Royal Commission is to the government and the nation, I mean, 25% of all the legislative drafting next year across the whole of the government is to deal with this Hayne Commission. Like, no one can remember a similar example where one industry, I mean, it is the biggest sector in the economy, so perhaps that is an important factor, but this is going to be a huge thing that our government and our parliament will be doing next year. So like this is a time to be pushing on the door.
What's your view specifically around the regulators? Do you
My
think
view-
we need to mandate that they start to implement RegTech themselves?
I mean, my view on the regulators is that they've been clearly incapable of enforcing the law. Now, the large organisations where you've seen significant malfeasance, and let's be frank here, I mean, the malfeasance in these organisations, I mean, people talk about a banking royal commission. I mean, it was a lot of the issues are to do with wealth management, right? Clearly, like, there was a culture there's a shocking culture in a lot of these organisations where basically, I mean, we talk about John Setka and the CFMEU treating the court fines like speeding tickets, right? I mean, these guys are just as bad. So, if not worse. So it wouldn't be fair to say that it was just the institutions that had failed to comply with the law. I mean, the regulators clearly, and we think that ASIC has been really quite a poor regulator over the long run, really disappointing. We've now put enormous resources into ASIC and have totally restructured it. I mean, the commission is basically a whole new commission pretty much. And so our expectation is ASIC will get better at enforcing the law. Now, what we want to do with this review is to work out how can they enforce the law by using these contemporary solutions that you have within the confines of this building.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the concerns that clearly, let's call it the broader fintech and regtech ecosystem would have is that we're already seeing, for example, a lot of the institutions that were heavy hit in the Royal Commission and others that are wary of that example, taking a step back and regressing, if you will, into just focusing on risk and compliance and so forth, right? And really clamping down on anything that's seen as new or potentially untested. And I think there's a lot of concern that certainly the regulators will do the same. And it's not just ASIC. We've seen APRA, for example, literally refuse companies from adopting new startup technology simply because they are more comfortable with legacy, expensive, and to an extent outdated technology, because that's what they've seen other institutions use, and therefore there's a perception of reduced risk. And that's coming now at a time where, through the government, we're trying to push for greater competition, restricted ADIs, neobanks and challenger banks. So we've almost got this weird kind of juxtaposition where on the one hand, we've got increased scrutiny, tightening of the belt and focus on the big end of town. But there's almost a risk that some of that mindset within the regulators will also spill into the fintechs and regtechs that we all rely on to increase competition, but inadvertently actually make it harder for them to get in as well.
We could have the best laws in the world, right? We could have the most beautiful, gold-plated, most, fantastic laws, beautiful statute books, and we put some leather on the front of them and all that sort of stuff. It'd be great, right? But unless you enforce the law, then who cares? I mean, clearly, the ability to enforce the law, and we've seen, I think, in recent weeks with some of the AML CTF issues that some institutions have faced, is getting harder and harder, right? So clearly, there's a need to be more innovative and look to these different solutions. So if our law and our policy-making framework doesn't facilitate that, then the country's in trouble from a compliance point of view going forward. But I think Brad Pragnell and I 10 years ago were talking about almost 10 years ago, this strategic review of innovation in the payment sector that the RBA did. And then I met with the RBA last week, and they're now sort of taking me through how they do all these real-time payments and things. I mean, that was never going to happen. So I think where policymakers and good regulators step in and work with industry, you can actually get really big step change.
So I'm just going to switch topic for a moment then. So one of the key focus areas for Stone & Chalk, for example, right, when it comes to supporting startups, scaling and growing, there's 5 that we focus on, and it really is in this priority order. The number 1 is access to customers, 2 is access to capital, 3 is access to talent, 4 is expertise, and the last is obviously being a part of a great curated community. So if we go back to customers for a moment, you're quite right in that pretty much every sector of the economy is dominated by a small number of oligopolies. And so whether a new organisation, a startup or scale-up, if they need to be successful here in Australia, the reality is that they're either, if they're B2B, they need to sell to these oligopolies, or if they're consumer-related products, then they usually need a partner with these oligopolies to get distribution and scale to then reach the consumer. And Zip's a classic example of having to do that with Westpac, for example, and there's many of those examples around the country. So that brings back the issue of adoption, right? And EY put out their FinTech census, and gratefully, Australia's gone from 37% to just over 50% adoption, but then it's also dropped in the rankings globally, which means that the rate at which consumers and businesses are adopting FinTech is slowing down compared to the rest of the world. And what that says is that we've got a significant issue when it comes to being able to sell to large enterprise and sell into government, because in many respects, they're the gateway to scaling and success. So the question to you is, what do you think needs to be done to incentivise big business and government to commercially collaborate with startups and scale-ups?
So that's a good question. I'll take them both separately. So on the government side, my Senate leader, Matthias Cormann, put out a report last week which shows that our awarding of government contracts, I've read this speech 3 times this week, has gone from about 14 billion to about 18 billion in 2 years, which is a 20-odd% increase. But what I'd say to you, Alex, is what you need to do in your submission is tell us how we can improve government procurement rules to suit your sector. What else can we do? Now, the other side of the coin there is we have put in place as a government new payment rules for SMEs. Now, do you know this? If you e-invoice with us, the Commonwealth Government now, we'll pay you in 5 days. How good's that? Thank you very much. So
I didn't know that. I wouldn't mind doing some business with you guys.
Oh, well, more than welcome. So that's a good example of, I hope you'll take me at my word here, that we've been happy to try different things. And I think the idea that 10 years ago that the Commonwealth Government would be down to five payment days for e-invoices to small businesses, and we would have ramped up by 20% in 2 years our small business procurement, I don't think you would have believed me. So look, this is a real area of focus for our government across the board. So the first part of the answer is tell us what else we could do with government procurement rules that would suit you. The second part of the answer is really one for the market. I mean, I'm a markets man, and I think that this is a question that you should be putting to the BCA. I think the BCA, to their eternal credit, started a lot of this small business payment time caper, because when I was there, Peter Strong, who runs the Small Business Council, very energetic man, unforgettable man in many ways, said, look, we've just got one issue we want you to fix, big business, and this is 140 top companies, many of which are, because this is Australia, many of which are foreign companies, which is great. And he said, you guys don't pay us in 30 days, you pay us in 60 or 90 days, right? And we're cactus, we're dead. And so we brought in at the time, or the BCA brought in at the time, a 30-day payment code for small businesses. And that then put pressure on the Commonwealth. So I think, sorry this is a long answer, but I think it's probably my only good answer so far, is I would strongly encourage you to put in your sub what else we can do as a Commonwealth government, but then put it to the BCA and say, here are some things we want you, because all the big guys are there.
So how's this one for you then? So one without notice, how's that?
Great.
One of the things that we've been talking about for a little while now is how we can utilise an existing regime like R&D tax credits, for example. Yeah. So we won't go into perhaps the obscure nature of what large firms perhaps claim as R&D. However, what about the idea of saying, right, a certain percentage of eligible R&D tax spend must be allocated to collaborating with startups and scale-ups in Australia?
Look, personally, I think we've discussed this before. I'm quite open to that idea. And the reason I'm more open to that idea than I would have been some years ago is because we've crossed the Rubicon into this territory of saying to people or organisations that contract with us, well, you've got to do this payment time, And, we act, so we're much more, what's the word I'm looking for? We're much more activist in how we run our own affairs now. So it's almost like a tied grant that the Commonwealth would pay the states and say, you've got to spend it on that bridge over there. So personally, I'm open to it. I mean, I'm not here to, I'm not the Prime Minister. I'm not going to bind the government's policy-making direction today, but I'm open to the idea, and it should definitely go in the submission. Okay. I mean, but you talk about some of the things that large companies claim. I mean, it takes me back to the debate we had 2 weeks ago in the Senate on the Ensuring Integrity Bill, and you go through all the different things that some of these unions have used the members' money for: weight loss surgery, Botox, tattoos. Tell you what, it must be amazing.
So just getting quickly into the actual inquiry now. So
yeah.
I believe there's been several submissions already made. Have you had a chance to look at some of those already?
I've had a very good skim.
Have you seen anything that's so far been unexpected or particularly new that...
I think one of the things that's come up in the first instance is that the way we organise ourselves as a country is quite poor, in the sense that there are a lot of moving parts within government that are doing things in this space. And so I expect we'll get more input on how that could be better organised in the future.
Okay. And so this is more a reflection and an expectation probably from some of us that have been doing this for quite some while. And we've got Deborah from the RegTech Association, and we've got Beck from the FinTech Association as well. And over the last several years, we've probably had innumerable meetings with, parliamentarians.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Department heads, agencies, and lost count of the number of submissions we've had to make, right? And this all predates you, so you're kind of like got immunity from this
question. Thanks so much.
And I think one of the disappointments and frustrations that some of us have is we've provided what we think is really great IP around some of the changes we can make and implement in the country to really take us forward at speed. And the results that we've seen come back from policymakers and departments in many cases have been watered down. The incentives into early stage investment, the entrepreneur visas and skilled visas coming through. I mean, the regulatory sandbox with ASIC. So the key question for you is it going to be different this time? Can we daringly have a lot more positive hope that what we're going to put into these submissions is going to be taken seriously and to cut through the bureaucracy in terms of what needs to get done and implemented?
Well, I think already you would have seen that a lot of Stone and Chalk's perspectives have been reflected in the issues paper. So I think you'd have to give me a 2 out of 10 for that.
I'll give you a 4.
Oh, gee, that's good. Wow. It's better than I get at home. So I think the answer to the question is this is the first time we've done a whole of government review of this sector. And I know that Rebecca and others have also said that this is something that we ought to do not through one department in the government, which looks at, because the problem with the government, and I'm not a government guy, I don't want to be a government guy, I guess maybe I'm in the wrong job, but we look at this through the prism of, okay, I'm the innovation department, I'm the treasury department, I'm the APRA, I'm the ASIC, I'm the whatever, and then you've got the central agencies like PMC, and then you've got CSIRO, and you've got spaghetti bolognese or something happening. So the Senate reports to the people of Australia that elect the senators. So this will be a report that will present in a bipartisan fashion what we find to be the key challenges and pathways forward to address those challenges. That will be a whole of government view. Now, obviously, you don't want me to present something which is ignored, so I will work as a member of the government, as a government senator, with my betters or my senior people in the executive to make sure that it's relevant.
Well, kudos to you. I mean, in all fairness, this is the first time we've had a Minister for FinTech. It's the first time that we've had an Australian senator that's actually straight out of the gate, first term in Senate, a couple of months after being elected, is already leading this inquiry, which is fantastic to see. And another comment I'd want to make is that I think it's quite an enlightened approach to have also engaged the opposition as a co-chair to be part of this. Can you share a little bit about what their thinking is at the moment. Where are they on this journey as it relates to, how fintech and regtech can actually help transform the economy?
I mean, as I said, I spent my whole career, not creating. I'm not smart like you guys. You create fantastic things, but I spent my whole career in the private economy. So I know how frustrating unnecessary partisanship is. Like, it's just so unnecessary. It's like a big inefficiency for you guys. So the deputy chair is a very impressive person, Marielle Smith from South Australia. She's a new senator as well. And we are very keen to come up with something which is a bipartisan report. I think she hails from, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but Marielle hails from South Australia. She's a Labor senator, but I think she probably recognises that what the South Australian government's doing over there with the enterprise, with Stone and Chalk and Lot 14 and the Space Agency and all that. I think there's a strong recognition that that's all going in the right direction. More broadly, I mean, you probably all had good dealings with Ed Husick. He's a terrific guy, quite an enlightened fellow. And so, I mean, the Labor Party have had a bad year, right? And I'm really happy to say that. I'm really glad they've had a bad year. But they on these issues, we really want to try and stick on the bipartisan agenda. So one thing I would say is it's really important not just to focus on the government. It's really important to keep on working on the opposition, because if you wanted to run a scare campaign against the changes that your sector wants, it'd be very easy. So I wouldn't take it for granted and only focus your efforts on us. And I think Marielle's a good person to work with. I think Ed's good. Who's the day-to-day? They have a day-to-day shadow minister for this area, don't they?
Claire O'Neill now, isn't it?
Yeah, Claire's great. Yeah, they've got good people. I mean, there's, as a new person in Canberra, I can definitely say that it's a lot more collegiate than people think. I mean, we all get along quite well. We're all quite friendly, and we don't agree on a few things, and that kind of captures the attention. But it's almost like managed conflict.
All right, well, I think that's all we have time for this morning. So thanks very much, Senator. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks, mate.
Look forward to having you back again. And I think it'd be nice to,
I'd love to come back.
when you get the opportunity to review the submissions, to come back and share some of your thoughts, the key things that have been raised, and really have a conversation around, where to next.
Thanks for all your time and support, and thanks for being here this morning.
So guys, if you can join me in thanking the Senator.